Wonderful. Well, we see some folks are trickling in, so let's just get started. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining today. It's going to be an exciting, fun panel. Before we get there, let me give you a quick society update and give you a lay of the land here. So we started this year by launching by the IPO, Coinbase IPO, if you remember, that was one of its kind, set the market trends and standard for me personally. And since then, we have seen an accelerated interest, adoption, and traffic and engagement in the blockchain and digital asset space. So if you've been following the news, here's a little tidbit for you. Blockchain funding this year hits a record high in first half of 2021, and it is anticipated to reach over $14.6 billion by the year end, shattering the previous record of $4.5 billion set in 2018. Mentions of terms like Bitcoin and crypto and blockchain have skyrocketed. Reminds me of the frenzy we lived in 2017. And then we also see major institutional engagements like BNY Mellon, Citi, Goldman Sachs enter into digital asset custody market. And recent Horowitz announced the new crypto fund. When they announced it was $1 billion fund, and they were oversubscribed to $2.2 billion, meaning that money is going to be deployed somewhere. Enterprise blockchain comes out of trough of disillusionment. We went through a phase where there was heightened expectations, but enterprise blockchain products were not delivering on those around 2018, 19, and 20. And I think now we're coming out of that phase in 2021. And to me, that year marks a second phase of this entire space. If you look at the first phase as Bitcoin's introduction in 2009 and adoption in 10 through 2021 being the first phase, and now we're getting into the second phase. So these are great indicators for our overall space. Just to acknowledge our Gigabyte sponsor, TIBCO, thank you for your contribution. Here's some new announcements for you guys. We at the Tag Blockchain Society are about to launch 4 new programs. And this marks a lot of interest and engagement with our society, and also expanding the team and getting a lot of interesting, unique leaders in the space to lead these efforts. So the programs are Demo Day, and I'll describe each one of them in a sentence or two. Mentorship program, Tag Blockchain Stars, and a legal working group. What Demo Day does is allows projects, be it in enterprises or startups, to demo their product or even a half-baked product to the community. The program is led by Michael Perlato, who incidentally is also one of our speakers today, so you'll get to hear from him. We're going to launch on October 20th, and there'll be application form for you to fill out to apply to be part of the Demo Day. We are only going to accept a maximum of 10 projects, just in the interest of time, and this is the first pilot program, so we want to take it easy, quality over quantity. Mentorship program. This is going to be an ongoing program led by Daniel Goldman of Unbanked, and this will be to connect founders in the blockchain space with mentors, and we will run various cohorts of it, and hopefully we can align them with the Demo Day, so when the mentorship cohorts concludes, some of those companies may be presenting their concepts and products on the Demo Day, like an accelerator would. The next one is the Tag Blockchain Stars, which is going to be led by Andrei Semenov, who is incidentally also a panelist today, and you'll get to hear from him. This is a very interesting program to connect select startups with enterprises, either as a technology partner or as a place to test their new technologies, get a first user adoption, etc. And this will be an ongoing program to increase that level of engagement between enterprises and startups, which I personally feel is a huge chasm in this space. As we see more and more startups coming up, they have a challenge in finding customers. Enterprise could be those customers, and enterprises have a challenge in creating innovation. they could learn from startups. So I think there is learning to be had on both sides, and hopefully this program accelerates that. And then last but not the least, the legal working group would be led by Austin Mills, who's a partner at Morris Manning and Martin, and also one of our board members. This program would be to give us ongoing, perhaps bi-yearly regulatory updates, and also start a position paper and start getting our legal and regulatory opinion out, since that has a lot of influence on how the space progresses in the United States. You will also hear some international perspectives there, because I think some regulation is more enabling for this space internationally than it is in the United States. So keep a lookout for that tag. We'll market these programs. You'll see emails and social media posts coming out. And if you're interested in joining any one of these or participating in any which way, feel free to reach out to these leaders. Before I move to the event, I do want to thank our chair of events, Jagruti Solanki, who is the CFO at BitPay, for leading events and helping us organize these and other events that we do, and also Melissa Davis, who is our chair for sponsorship. If you're new and never been to Blockchain Society, feel free to go to this website and sign up for an interest form and get engaged. Now, coming to the fun part. We're going to talk about asset tracking on blockchain today. What does that mean? Assets on distributed ledgers can be easily tracked, and it gives us provenance and immutability, and also process improvement. So to me, blockchain is a natural technology, or asset tracking is a natural use case for this technology. And now we will look at 4 different types of use cases of it. You'll get to hear from these exemplary leaders in the space who have not only experimented, but have practical applications that they've used blockchain for in asset tracking in various ways. I'm excited to introduce them to you: Michael Parlato, Andrei Semenov, Brenda Lloyd, and Mahesh Sahasraraman. And when you hear these, think about the following. How did they use the technology for a particular use case in their industry? What were some of the challenges that they might have faced? And what was the adoption that they might have gained? And how was the interest or lack of interest from some partners? Because to me, blockchain is about end-to-end process improvement. Did they actually achieve that as compared to current state technology? And what were their outcomes? What did they realize out of these exercises? So with that landscape, let's welcome all of our panelists. And we will start with Michael. Michael is the Vice President for Emerging Technologies at Income Payments. Michael, if you could give us a few minutes of the case study and walk us through what you guys did and help us understand the implications of it.
Sure, no problem. Thanks, Farouk. So I think it's probably good to set sort of the groundwork as to what Income Payments does today, as well as the team that I run. Income Payments is a transaction payments company, heavily focused in prepaid as well as bill payment and other areas. We started our journey about 3 years ago when clients started asking us questions about what we were doing in blockchain. And at that point, other than a few internet searches and internal discussions, we hadn't really initiated any POCs. So around that same time, we were beginning our in-house innovation center, Go Studio. And that group is focused on solving client challenges through the use of emerging technologies. And we're really looking to come up with new products, services, and companies that we can invest in. As part of that, our first initiative was to see if Go Studio could find an agri-tech project that we could use as an on-ramp into that channel. And through some of those same client interactions who were asking us about blockchain, we found that food safety and tracking channel was really interesting because it aligned with how we manage transaction processing today. And so, our transaction process is, adding value to accounts, connecting payment systems, and we process thousands of transactions a second. So that's very similar to agritech, and where each time an RFID tag is scanned on livestock, a life cycle event occurs, and that needs to be associated with an ID stored and business logic processed on it. So we identified a number of use cases that we could go after and can use blockchain to track food back to its origin. For example, tracing the ingredients, determine if it's organic or if it meets regulatory requirements. And through that time, we did a lot of evaluation to come up with an alternative to the solutions that were currently in the market. A lot of those solutions were expensive and took a lot of time to actually integrate. And so we started a proof of concept using a lot of trial and error. We stood up a Hyperledger Fabric instance on a major cloud provider with 2 nodes. And you may ask why we chose Hyperledger Fabric. And in this case, I'd like to say that we went through an extensive detailed evaluation, but it was really the result of insight that our partners and clients had already made, that they were using that solution. And we decided to leverage their existing work to fast track our proof of concept. But more importantly, it really aligned with the work that we were doing and the partners were doing, and we were hoping for a faster adoption by using the same technology. It really wasn't until after the work was developed that we completed further research, actually working with Roop as well, and identifying that the platform's real benefits for enterprise applications and being a private blockchain with good permissioning. While the work was a proof of concept, we wanted the results to be representative of the real world environment as much as possible. So we built APIs against the blockchain and an interactive interface to allow data collected through a barcode reader and the actual interface to generate blocks of data and post them to the blockchain. In later POC additions, we experimented with smart contracting and leveraging that to use to bill the retailers and manufacturers for the grocery raw materials delivered to those entities. We haven't yet integrated those into the broader POC, but we showed that it works and could be expanded. Once the POC was completed, we were comfortable that the solution worked. We started down the commercialization journey with a partner, which included interviewing 10 farmers of varying sizes, crops, and technical capabilities to identify whether the solution met their needs. Go Studios has experienced many obstacles in this project, including that our developers had limited experience setting up blockchain environments from scratch. The cloud setup process was not fully documented by the providers at the time that we were going through this proof of concept, and required numerous sessions with them to work out challenges. But really the biggest challenge that we had was we learned that the tech was the easy component of the projects, and really shifting the hearts and minds of the stakeholders was the real challenge. The business components required a large amount of time be spent in that area. Also, moving into a new channel with a company that has no historical knowledge of what was required required a lot of ramp up. Just something simple as the terminology used can be a challenge. We learned that the industry doesn't see farmers as small, medium sized, and they use the term called consortium farmers. Also in the agritech space, there's a long history of managing farms and safety with tried and true processes for as long as 60 years. and they aren't looking to make investments unless there's really something in it for them. And just because there's a great technical solution doesn't mean that that's the focus of everyone in the ecosystem. Somebody made a quote while we were doing the project that there's hundreds of technical solutions littered throughout the farms throughout the United States of things that have been tested, tried, and failed. And so farmers are less interested in just jumping on every startup that that gets started. So that's our use case. That's our proof of concept. We're continuing to work through other areas such as healthcare, banking, insurance, and transaction processing as well. Ruth?
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for sharing that. That's quite a bit of work over quite a few years. So here's a question for you, something really basic that you can help our audience understand. How was using a distributed ledger or blockchain better than the current state or pre-blockchain set of technologies that you had? What outcomes could be achieved using distributed ledgers that could not be achieved with other technologies?
Well, I think the biggest thing was the fact that we could diversify the nodes to each one of the providers, and they could see the content and be permissioned it, as opposed to Incom being the central point of the database and having to have them come into our system every time that they needed to make a transaction. That seemed to be the biggest advantage to using the blockchain. Speed wasn't really a concern. This isn't a real-time transaction. It's more of a life cycle event type of solution. So if there was a bit of a lag in the time of updating the blockchain, that wasn't as big of a concern for our proof of concept.
Right. So to summarize that, you would say that, the metaphor I use of a shared wall, by using blockchain across a distributed set of players, they can all get the information at the same time as the information is published, which is not the case with database enabled business processes of the past. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that, and also the other benefit really was each of the people within the ecosystem are sort of acting as overseers that the data is actually valid, correct, and that no one has changed the data along the way, because they each, of course, have a copy of the data that's on the blockchain.
Right, right. By the way, if the audience has any questions, feel free to type them in the chat as we look at each use case. And then at the end, we will open it up for a general audience discussion as well. But if there are questions now that can be addressed along the way, we're happy to take them as they come. So Michael, one last question for you. This is on the technical side. The choice of Hyperledger Fabric is understandable. It's the leading permission-based, enterprise-based platform, if you will. So my question is, without naming the companies that you did not choose or the platforms you did not choose, what made you make that choice? Why did you not choose them? Let's say you explored ABC company or ABC platform. What tipped the favor in favor of Hyperledger Fabric?
Like I mentioned, it was mainly because 3 of our largest customers were actually experimenting and leveraging the technology in a consortium already. And so our hope was to help those particular customers, and the easiest way to help them was to work with the technology that they were working with. Okay. So that's what tipped it. Since doing this proof of concept and going through this project, we've actually experimented with Ethereum as well, and being able to put the application on multiple different blockchains, and we've made, that has been proven and made possible if we needed to go another route other than Hyperledger Fabric.
Great, those are great insights. I appreciate the long time that you've been experimenting with these technologies, and I appreciate the work and the knowledge and learning that comes out of these POCs. So thank you for leading that effort.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Sure. So let's get to Andrei Semenov, who is the Director of Innovation and Supply Chain at Kona Services, which is the IT arm of Coca-Cola. Andrei, would you tell us about your use case and implementation? I know you have been experimenting it with blockchain for a while as well.
That's right. Thank you, Roop, for having me here today, and thanks to our attendees for spending their lunch break with us. So really appreciate your time and happy to share our story. So like Roop said, my name is Andrei Semenov. I'm part of the Kona Services, which is an organization that provides products and services to run the full end-to-end IT processes or business process on IT stack for the 12 largest bottlers in North America. And not sure if everybody knows, but Coca-Cola is a franchise system. It runs as a franchise system as well with independent companies in it. And in the US alone, there are over 50 different organizations, independent companies running on independent systems. And what Kona did, we worked with 12 largest bottlers by volume and the territory and put them all into one instance, one SAP instance, to provide them a template solution to run the end-to-end business. And what the Coca-Cola bottling business includes is actually producing the Coca-Cola products, storing them in the warehouses, and then distributing them into the warehouses for the further store distribution, what we call direct store delivery. So where we go to the stores and deliver the product. But also what not a lot of people realize is that only a few bottlers are owning these production plants. And so essentially there's a network of the bottlers in North America and Canada. They're connected to each other by relationship of a supplier vendor. There would be a smaller supplier with one plant who is producing particular product, and that bottler would source this product to other organizations. And what makes it more complex is that there's no bottler, they don't have their own decision to what produce where and what to distribute where. They have an organization helping them to organize the supply chain at a national level, and they plan where it's better to produce which product, who can deliver to who, and then the execution is done on the bottler level. So now with this, it's been a business network that's been in place for many, many years, right? Almost close to 100 years. And the bottlers were just buying and selling to each other. And with ERPs coming into play, a lot of automation came into place, but still the collaboration between these IT systems was a challenge. And then the technologies like EDI, they've been in place for many decades now, but there was a lack of adoption of this technology to make sure that we can connect all the system together and then we can remove friction in the supply chain transactions. So till the blockchain implementation, we still saw the data issues, data alignment issues, process inconsistencies, friction in the transactions, and the visibility to these transactions, right? So this is where it came into the picture, and we pitched from the Kona perspective that we could implement a technology that will not have necessarily a central authority to provision everybody and own everybody's data, but would rather choose a technology that would solve a few issues. One is the integration issue between the IT systems, and would provide a common way for integrating the system of records into the network, right? And essentially the blockchain network, because with EDI, each EDI implementation would have their own requirements, their own set of fields and standards that each peer-to-peer needs to exchange. And I think that was one of the reasons why the EDI adoption was lacking. And so we went forth with a proposal to do a proof of concept. We collected a few business people in the room. So what we started with is with a problem that we had, and has been there since the very first day the Kona was formed and we onboard our bottlers onto the platform, is how do I more efficiently work with other bottlers and exchange the purchase orders, the invoices, and share the information about assets I'm sending to them, like pallet numbers, expiry dates, and everything. And there was no good way. There were few EDI implementations. And so what we collect the business folks together in one room to talk about what problems can we solve with this technology and whether it's going to be a fit. And then the outcome of this initial discussion was a proof of concept that lasted for about half a year, where we proved out that we can build a network using, again, the Hyperledger Fabric framework. There was not a lot of choices for enterprises 3 years ago. And we moved forward with a build where we proved out that we can solve the integration problem very easily by building the integration plugins. So from Kona perspective, we built a plugin for the SAP ERP that talks to the Hyperledger Fabric network. We also partnered with another IT provider who built a connector for another system of record that most of the non-Kona bottlers are using. And what it helped us to do is come up with a standardized structure and agreed upon shared information that is now shared in the network among the participants, and they're exchanging this data between each other. And so from the process flow perspective, it dramatically improved the quality of data that the bottlers were exchanging. It provided them visibility to all the supply chain transactions, to making all these transactions to be in Amazon-like, where I can see the status of each step in my order fulfillment, whether something was out of stock or under fulfilled, and I can react to it immediately instead of waiting for my truck to show up, and then I realize that I'm out of stock and I'm going to be losing on the revenue. So blockchain very clearly was a solution for that, and we went live 2.5 years ago with our first bottlers, and now in 2021 we're just increasing the network. We're at the speed of deployment, adding new participants to the network to reflect this business Coca-Cola bottling network onto the technology stack. And then once we have enough network power, enough connections done, we can also start looking into integration with our suppliers who are delivering into the Coke network, as well as on the customer side as well.
Right. Thanks, Andre, for sharing that. So here's a question for you, the same one as I asked Michael. I think you've answered it, but let's just summarize. What was different or better about a distributed ledger-based system as compared to the previous or state of technology that you were using?
So I think, first of all, the previous one was really just the EDI messaging peer-to-peer, right? So, and if there was a need, a business need and enough business value to build this EDI integration, the business would move forward, but they would connect only a limited number of peers just to solve the big issue that they had. And nobody was looking on a major level, on global level, how to solve this and build a network. And then I think secondly is there was always some sort of a centralization happening, right? So whether it's a Kona or other organization that takes a lead and builds a solution, builds a portal, and we need to single sign on everybody to that portal. So how do we do that? Where we're dealing with different size of the companies, the big one, the mid size, and the smaller ones. And so the blockchain just allows us to create distributed network of nodes, and each participant would have access to their own data. And then as a next level, they would run their distributed application on it, because it's a standard set of APIs described and distributed within this consortium, within the network. And anybody can deploy their mobile application. I have some of the examples using the portal applications that are running there. The integrations themselves delivering the same API structures and methods. And this allowed us to move faster with the adoption as well, right? As we built our first use case and we built the connectors, now it's just a matter of aligning on the data, making sure that we're talking to each other using the standards, right? We're using GS1 standards, we're changing the JIT codes, we're sharing our pallet information in the GS1 standard. So one system shared by blockchain, another system can pick it up from the blockchain and kind of trace it down the network as the pallet moves in the supply chain.
Right, right. So we see a few common themes between or across use cases here. A theme of decentralization or distributed nature of system of record. A theme of value chain across different bottlers or across different entities and getting information quickly at the same time. Some level of process improvement through integration. So, and then the last one that I note is the journey from EDI into ERP to blockchain-based distributed systems. So I think that is a common thread that you will find across asset tracking use cases, across different industries. So my last question to you is, when you started this and you started talking to the bottlers, which are essentially your customer in a sense, they have to buy into the technology and use the system. What were the challenges or advantages that you faced? What was the reaction from the bottlers?
Yeah, I think one of the reactions in the beginning was that, the blockchain will not help me solve my accuracy issues. It will not help me save my, performance issues, right? And this is true. And with the blockchain, we don't expect that all the data now becomes correct, right? And what we saw, in fact, is that once the incorrect data is loaded in the blockchain, it's very hard to then correct it, right? So if a user makes a mistake and it does something incorrectly, then it's really hard to reverse it back. And that was true. And for that, in blockchain, you really have to think about how do you solve this last mile problem. Is if I ship something out, I need to use other scanners or RFID to put this data on the blockchain and ensure that it's accurate. And that was one of the concerns in the beginning that we couldn't solve. But what we provided with blockchain is really this reconciliation part where before it's just going to be one party sending the shipment out and loading the truck and printing the BOL. And then if there's something incorrectly loaded in the truck, you would have a claim going, and the claim was taking longer. Now with blockchain, if you have two systems of records connected and you have both of them using some sort of additional technology like scanners or RFID, loading the truck and also accepting and doing the goods receipt, now you can compare these two pieces of information and use some of the smart contract rules to trigger certain events, whether it's a create an automatic claim, send emails, send push notifications, and then it improved the timing on resolution of these claims dramatically, because now you have all the information on the chain reconciled in real time versus previously someone had to go manually research what happened in the supply chain.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So 2 points to note there. One, blockchain alone is not enough. We have to use other technologies, be it IoT-based, sensor-based technologies, or even AI in some instances, to ensure that the data getting onto the chain initially is actually accurate, because when it gets there, it's going to be immutable, so harder to change after. And then the other aspect that you mentioned, deploying a shared layer of trust, as I call it, so that the reconciliation back and forth that we used to do in the database or centralized database world, that is minimized, and you have a shared layer of truthful data that all the participants look at the same time, and then it can operate operations from there. So I think those are key learnings. So thank you, Andre, for sharing that. I know you guys have been working on it for a while, so thanks for being an enterprise leader in this space and being part of this, being part of enlarging this ecosystem and creating a knowledge base for us. So appreciate that work.
Thank you.
Just a shout out, I see my friend Vishal Venkatram on the audience list here. Vishal is CIO at GE Power. So Vishal, be careful. If you keep listening to this, I might have you on the panel next time. So just watch out for that. But thanks for joining. So on that note, let's get to our next speaker. Let's talk to Brenda Lloyd, who is the president at Blockchain Fob. Brenda, as I understand, you come from a long track record in the restaurant industry. So everything that we eat has gone through your hands, metaphorically speaking.
Thank you, Roop. That's true. In fact, listening to Michael and Andre, I've lived their pain. So especially around food traceability. That's what I've spent the last 11 years trying to get the industry to adopt, working through GS1 and other entities. So been there and done some of that. And as you'll find with our use case, many of the benefits and so forth are the same. So the visibility. What I'm going to talk about is a proof of concept or pilot that we have done. The current situation in restaurant equipment, and that's our focus right now. We have other business segments we're working with, but we're going to focus on equipment in the restaurant industry, since that's my background. Right now, there's very little visibility there. So when a manufacturer ships their products, they leave their dock and then they have very little visibility into it until it shows up for warranty work. So our initial pilot was to look at that very first part of the supply chain, though we see benefits throughout the supply chain. In the beginning, we're working currently with a manufacturer who is part of a very large parent company. And so we took one of their rollouts. So we define a rollout as a set number of items moving to a predetermined number of locations and a set period of time. So this obviously makes a very good use case. And we looked at a small one. 2 items going to 200 locations, and we attached a unique identifier to the asset and also to the packaging on the asset. We also provide that same identifier to use on things like bill of lading if the shareholder chooses to use that. So what we did for this pilot is that we talked with especially the customer service groups. Our approach was to find the lowest hanging fruit to be able to show immediate benefits from this. The customer service group says that when they do this type of rollout, they're going to get calls after the estimated ship time. Calls begin to come in around that activity at about 10 to 15% of the locations involved. We're going to call them daily. So someone is going to call every day, in this case 200. They got, we used about 12% because they said between 10 and 15. They said that they would see about 24 calls a day, specifically for this small rollout. They spend 15 to 20 minutes on each of these calls because with very little technology available, they take the call, normally a call, it can be an email, certainly. They take the call, then they need to track, get the pro number and then track this item and then call the person back or reach back out. So the estimate of 15 to 30 minutes of team member time effort spent for each of these. So you take 24 times the amount of time spent, you can see it's significant. What we saw in this 3-week rollout, we used the first 2 days to let them get used to the system. So we worked through that. So after the beginning on the 3rd day, we began to track, talking with them on their time. The time dropped to about 5 minutes per call. So very quickly able to show benefit to them by them being able to see it on a shared system. And that dropped immediately to about 5 minutes. If you look at the numbers there, that means they saved about 6 to 8 hours a day in actual time per inquiry. And if we look at it, average employee rate in this particular rural manufacturer of about $12, they immediately saw about $100 a day in margin that they perceived could be used just from this small one. If we extrapolate that across their entire business plan, they are very excited because they're seeing that this could quickly impact their business in the 100,000 plus range. This is just the beginning of the supply chain. We see these types of benefits as we go through. As Michael pointed out, adoption is a real hurdle in this industry because there's concern about sharing the data. There are just many reasons why it takes a lot of business focus to get people on board. When you ask about why blockchain can help with these onboarding, Roop, I think it's the trust, and you mentioned the trust, but it's also confidence in the data. When we've worked with restaurant entities, most of them will say, we're happy to build an integrated system. just so you start with ours. So it's trusting other people with the data. And even though, as Andre said, there will be errors in the data, knowing that the data is shared in a third-party way, that they're not giving it to someone else to keep hold of, is a big part of it. So as our next phase of this particular proof of concept is to begin working with the end user. We're getting that set up now. We think they will see similar or even greater benefits, because as they make that call, there's usually internal conversations. Big question around, it's a simple question, where's my stuff, is an expensive one that bounces around in these hard goods types of systems if they do not have a shared platform with some confidence around data that they can go to and answer that question for their partners. So that's where we are. We are very pleased with what we've seen in the very first part of this. This manufacturer, being part of a large parent, is excited about the opportunity as well. And we're now connecting with end users. Another side note, one of the things manufacturers miss out on is that they often don't even know who the installer is for their equipment. So they begin to get the warranty claims and then have to start trying to build some intelligence around who installed it, was it done correctly, and so forth. So you can see that the benefit not only of just straight up team member hours, other benefits of having the immutable record is going to be very powerful for this segment.
Right. Well, that's a great summary. Thanks for that, Brenda. So you already answered my regular question, how blockchain adds value. Here's a different question that you brought up to the discussion. In a lot of cases, in a lot of asset tracking using blockchain cases, the technology part of it, the how part of it, is actually not that difficult, as Michael mentioned as well. Yeah, you have to work at it to figure out the specifics, but you can do it. We have talented folks. The bigger question and the challenge becomes, whose data is it? Who can read it? Who can use it? Who can report on it, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a big challenge we see in almost all the consortiums I've seen in the blockchain space, regardless of industry. Eventually you'll run into that obstacle. So how did you guys solve for that particular issue? Whose data is it? Who owns it? Who can read it? Who can report on it? Who gets to see what?
Well, part of it obviously has already been discussed, and that is the setting authorities around who can see. Obviously, a manufacturer would only see their data. But I think we've had many discussions around this. This is probably a less risky, working in food safety. Obviously, there's more risk in sharing that data. The equipment we saw in the beginning was a less risky piece of data. So we are approaching this, that the movement of the product, the general, eventually the general life cycle tracking of things like the service and the parts that go into it, we consider that to be public data. And there are benefits, we think, up and down the supply chain for people to share, such as one discussion is that an operator may get a longer warranty by using this system because the manufacturer then can see that it's being maintained as it should be and so forth. So some benefits at each end that allow people to have that confidence. The other is that anything that includes costs. So the cost of that life cycle and so forth, we think will need to be behind the firewall as such for the customer, so they can build their own life cycle costs and keep that private, but share the life cycle trends with the industry. Certainly a benefit to the manufacturer and the end user to see if there is a certain risk around a piece of equipment.
Right, okay. So when you approach these players, if you will, in the ecosystem, what was the reaction? What were the challenges? You mentioned that they're happy to build the system until it's theirs, which is a common issue. Get on my platform, why should I get on your platform? So how did you solve for that, and what were the initial reactions you faced?
I think the timing is good for what we're doing. There's a recognition of gaps. There's this recognition of lost opportunity. So being able to say, keep your system, but feed the data into a shared system so that transparency comes to it. We're seeing that most people see the benefit. Being able to have things like this small use case that says, and by the way, we think very quickly there can be dollar savings as we build toward all the other benefits that we think are there, can help people to get over that fear of shared systems.
Interesting point. Great. Well, thanks, Brenda, for leading the effort and helping us eat better, I hope.
We'll make sure that it gets cooked better, at least. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thanks for all the work you've done in this space over the years, and I wish to see a lot more exciting news coming out from the pilots you're doing now.
Thank you.
All right, with that, let's move on to Mahesh. Mahesh, who is a principal architect at UPS. And incidentally, he's also one of our board members at Tech Blockchain Society. So Mahesh, I know UPS has been a behemoth in the blockchain space. You guys have done a lot of experimentation. You have quite a few patents. You've been at it for a while. And you have done work along with FedEx in setting up standards in this in the supply chain for blockchain space. Mahesh also represents UPS in consortiums like Beta. So Mahesh, tell us about your journey. What's the kind of, I know you've done a lot of use cases, so I'm curious to see which one you're going to talk about today. And then tell us about your overall journey with blockchain and UPS.
Awesome. So being the last speaker, I can probably use the proverbial, hey, it's tough to be last and it's tough to follow and have some unique points from the group here. But anyway, thank you very much. And thank you guys for spending the afternoon here a little bit. So just to kind of go back, right? It's a bit of a history lesson. At least from where our journey started. This started as an innovation exercise. I think Michael mentioned back in 2017, his journey started. It's similar story. I think the exponential rise of Bitcoin back then kind of raised many eyebrows in the company in terms of, is this a technology that we should be interested in? What should we do? Where does it apply? And how do we move forward with leveraging something like this, right? So that was our start as an innovation journey for us, and to lay a foundation, right? So we consider, UPS as it's as a globally trusted partner. We kind of have a custody of our customers' assets. We store and we transport them, and that's the duration. So for us, having customers. Valuables, they are goods in our hands. We take it very seriously. We want to be able to monitor, track, report. And as we get into multiple different segments like healthcare and stuff like that, we want to be more good. We want to be more efficient and get better at it. So for us, this journey started off with that sort of a mentality, a foundation, I think. And then on top of it, there were three primary things that we wanted to sort of accomplish, right? So how do you take a technology and allow you to leapfrog, not just augment what you do, but can this technology materially leapfrog you in some way, right? And then come with some of the three things that we kind of used as a watermark for us to benchmark some of the use cases, I should say, was accelerating commerce, right? We have a lot of cross-border transactions. We move a lot of things. So is there an opportunity for us to accelerate commerce in the sense, can we work with customs? Can we work with any regulatory agencies in any countries? How do we kind of get to that point where we can help our customers accelerate commerce? How can we bring a 3-day transaction to 2-day or 1 day? How do we do that? So that kind of by itself challenges the current process, the current activities that we do in our systems. The next one in that order would be, we already touched upon it a little bit, which is shared information. Not just who can create, read, update, but what is the value of the information that we are going to share for a specific business process that we want to accomplish that will help accelerate the journey, right? So we want to get to that level of detail because all of us know that you cannot put extensive amounts of data in blockchain. You have to be very religious about what you put in there and how materially important it is for the consumer of that information, right? So there was some thinking around that. And then the last part of it, which I think is true for almost all organizations, is does it add anything to the bottom line? Does it have a revenue opportunity? Is it a cost savings? What does it do to us, right? And that's for me is kind of the flywheel thing, right? If you don't kind of have any revenue or cost opportunities, if you don't present those, these innovation journeys don't move further along. So that's a very important foundational pillar for us. So that was how we kind of started our journey back in the day. It's still true to this day for a large part of what we do. And then on top of that, we then created a model of engagement, right? How do you kind of attack these different requests that we are getting in? And 2017, 18 was a crazy period for us in terms of the ask from UPS to engage in our customers and the other way around too. So we built some prototypes. We can talk about that here in a minute. But we also created where we wanted to engage with our customers and our vendors, right? So if a customer wanted us to engage in a prototype that they're building, we were open to that idea. Same thing with vendors. So we engaged with, back in the day, we engaged with SAP. They were building something and we engaged with them to pilot and prototype. We were one of their innovation partners in that journey. And lastly, Arup, you touched on standards, right? So we are part of beta. Standards is a big part of this because that affects information that's important for us. And that kind of in those three areas, right? Our prototyping, our engagement with the customers, and participation in standards bodies kind of is our engagement, right? To how we want to tackle. The use case that we've done use cases in the global trade area, international global trade. We've done prototypes with brokerage and customs, with multiple customs agencies. We've done route compliance type of prototypes. We've done asset tracking. We've done, or also at least not done, but we have had some paper exercises, I should say, around how we would go about doing some sort of a product-related blockchain. And again, all of these things, right? UPS is just a participant in the process as a transportation company. There are areas where we generate the information that's material, but most part we rely on information from our customers. And also from other regulatory bodies and things like that. So one of the things that is very interesting for us from a use case point of view is obviously the global trade custom compliance use cases, and we have worked with customs agencies here and across to do some of those exercises, and predominantly what they entail is how do we get the information from a customer around the certificate of origin, the invoice that they have, the parts or pieces that they're shipping, and how do we kind of take that data and make that data shareable, right, across our different partners and across regulatory bodies. So what is important to realize from a UPS point of view, we in a 3PL or in the logistics space, we use a number of carriers. It's not just UPS. So we share data with air carriers, with TL, LTL, road carrier providers, multimodal, right? So we share information with a bunch of providers for the movement of a particular piece of freight. And sharing that information with these different entities is important. So let's say, as an example, we accept something in the US from a customer and we hand it off to a carrier. The carrier needs all that information. They need certain pieces of paper from UPS to take that and move it from point A to point B. And then they may hand it off to another a party to kind of do another leg. So that party needs the information. So if you look at how this information kind of the need for information and how it's shared, it's global, right? It goes beyond just UPS. It goes to other parties. It goes to customs. So that's the prototype or the proof of concept at a high level that we are kind of tackling and working on. And I think we're at a point where we're starting to integrate some of our enterprise systems, I should say, in very basic ways into some of our prototypes. So from 2017, talking about this, late 2020, 2021, our journey has just begun in terms of thinking about deploying this in terms of some particular areas. And I want to make sure that's very key, right? We're just saying key areas. We want to focus. We want to be very targeted in terms of how we focus and think about blockchain within UPS. I don't think we'll do it for all packages. I don't think the technology is even there to support that. And I say that because we are just one company that moves, north of 5 billion packages a year, 11 million packages or so a day. I don't know of a blockchain that kind of can handle all of this, share all of this, for UPS, let alone similar type of volumes from, DHL, FedEx, and other companies, right? So I don't think that every package will end up in a blockchain, quite frankly, but I think there is use case where there is high value or important or healthcare, where there is materially important information that's needed to be shared, may end up in blockchain to be shared, along with some cross-border movements that we think is valuable. So I think that's where we are in a grand scheme of things. I think our journey is still kind of progressing, or I would say trickling forward a little bit. And we have had we all kind of agreed that technology is the easy problem, and the process and the prioritization from our partners and customers are kind of also equally important to make this a success story. So that's where I think we are. Still a work in progress, not very far along, but
I think we lost Mahesh there. You frozen.
the journey is continues.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that journey, Mahesh. I saved this one for the last for a reason, because I think you guys have had the broadest set of experiences. You mentioned one of my favorite words, leapfrog. So when I teach and educate executives on blockchain and blockchain strategy, my position is, unless you are looking to use blockchain for a transformational use case, for leapfrog, not just incrementally improving certain processes that you have, you can do that, but that's not that much fun and not worth the time and effort. Unless you're leapfrogging, don't bother. So the question to you is, do you think we are accomplishing that, or do you think that we are on the road to accomplishing that in the near future, if we, or when we have more standards, when we have more robust infrastructure using blockchain? Is this something that will eventually become a default or a de facto way of sharing data across a complex supply chain of partners?
I think we are a little bit away from that reality or realizing that dream. I think whether I believe in that dream, yes, I do. I think if we are able to get there, where we can share the level of information that, Roop, I think you're thinking about, in terms of how we can leapfrog. I think that'll be an interesting time to witness. But as far as this technology goes and how this can enable, I think we will start a high value, low volume type use cases where we can use this to definitely think about, at least leapfrogging or accelerating some part of, international trade. I think we have to, right? Otherwise, it'll be very difficult to kind of explain the value proposition of this technology when you compare it to something else. What I call the technology of today.
Right.
Right. So in my mind, I don't think we are there yet, but this technology exhibits the potential to get us there. It's what concerns me, or what I think we need to work on more, is around the adoption story of this, right? Is how do you kind of get not only UPS but other competitors and provider, baselined on certain processes that we want to improve upon or define. How do we get our government agencies and others to kind of settle on, hey, this technology can do this, right? So what do you want to see from this technology, right? We need some of that conversation going in a big way. We see pieces of that conversation between a few organizations and few parties, and to realize what we were just talking about, right? Leapfrog. I think that conversation needs to expand.
Right. Yeah, you raised a common issue, which is around adoption. So same question I asked others, and I think your experience might be slightly different. Since you mentioned your customers were coming to you to do use cases around blockchain, and then you had to sort of respond to that demand, if you will. So what were the initial reactions? And I know you've been in the journey for a while, so how has that changed, their engagement with UPS-driven blockchain platforms?
I think absolutely. I think customers, from where we started off, I think even to be fair, right, they also experienced this moment of shock when in 2017, right? So I think, to be fair, the use cases that we were receiving back then were not as material. Were not very interesting at all, right? I would call them, these were, I am very upset, help use blockchain to, clear my upset stomach, kind of. That was the use case, but that was not really where we saw this technology fit, right? Yeah, we missed your pickup. Yep, we're sorry. We'll do better next time. We'll fix the problem, right? But you can't use blockchain to solve that problem, right? So we kind of got some of those things ironed out in the way, and the framework that we kind of laid out helped in that conversation to weed out what was really, some process problems that we need to kind of go address real head on, versus where we can engage with our, certain sector or certain areas of customers in advancing these conversations. And I think we've had some good conversations with many large companies in the past. And those dialogue, as we have had, over a couple of years, we can certainly see that their mindset has also changed, right? They're asking the same questions that we were thinking about would be important. And I think that maturity is getting there. That level of expectation that, what this technology can do, I think everybody is realizing it. So I think we are beyond that point at this point, where we'll get these, these type of old requests that I was talking about. So I feel a little bit, comfortable, or a little bit more optimistic about the conversations that we will have in the future, or we continue to have with our customers.
Right. So I have two more questions for you, and then we'll open the discussion to the entire panel. And by the way, folks, if you have questions, start putting them in the Q&A so we can get to them. So Mahesh, this question is more around the technical aspects. I know UPS has quite a few patents. So what have you discovered in the technical journey? And you didn't mention any kind of other platforms that you may have used. Maybe you've developed your own, which I suspect is the case. So share a little bit more insight, as much as you can, on the technical side of things.
So we, in the past, when we started our journey, very typical, nothing big, Ethereum, Hyperledger, those were the, starting points for us. Put a little salt on Ethereum, you get quorum. I mean, those were the kind of things that we kind of experimented with.
Yes.
So I think that's where we started, right? And there's nothing special here with any of these things, right? So they all do what they're supposed to do very differently. I think all of the panelists here kind of experimented and kind of landed on Hyperledger. We were very similar. We kind of experimented and landed on Hyperledger. And for us, from a technology point of view, the reason why we picked Hyperledger was I think we were hearing more conversations around the baseline against that. There were conversations around quorum, but quorum was getting built. It wasn't built back then, so it was in the process of development. And Ethereum really did not fit the bill for us with all the concept around gas and all that thing. It didn't work for us when we kind of looked at it. So those were Hyperledger was the one that we experimented with. And from a technology point of view, we're looking at what we needed to do from an enterprise adoption point of view, and the technology was evolving. It's still, I think, it's still in its paces, but it's far along than what it was back in the day.
Right.
When we looked at it, so we had questions around: is the technology mature? Can it interop between two different similar blockchain networks or different blockchain networks? Because we always feared that if UPS picked the hat, competitors would pick a different hat. Our customers would go to them, right? So how do you? It's not a question about what hat you pick, but does the hat fit on the head, right? So that's the question that we wanted to kind of address. The whole notion around consensus and how does it work? Does it apply for us, or should it apply differently?
Mm-hmm.
And then being a global company, if you set up nodes and they're in different geos, and what regulations apply, what regulatory framework are you bound to, governance and lack of standards, right? Some of those. And then mainly, I think that this still applies. I might be wrong, but still applies, I think, is the whole resource and skill set, right? So who do I hire to build these things at scale? How do my customers and everybody else get these resources to build them? So all of these kind of things were in the technology space that was constantly, we had to think about when we're thinking Hyperledger.
Right. Right. So let me share a broader question for the whole panel, and then I'll ask Mahesh my last question. I'm just sharing this with you so you guys can be thinking about it and be ready. So here's the question. Throughout this journey, what excited you the most? What was something that gave you joy and a sense of fulfillment and accomplishment as well? And then related to that would be, what would you tell someone embarking on this journey in 2021 to do differently? So what would you advise them to do differently than what you did? So as you think about that, let me get to the last question for Mahesh. So Mahesh, this is more on a strategy level. So when I teach, I talk about this idea of co-opetition, that the boundaries of firms, boundaries of companies are blurring. And Dr. Ben here in the audience, who's also one of our board members, would often remind me, child, I have been talking about this since 1985. So that is true. And thanks, Dr. Ben, for leading our understanding of these complex ideas. So the question really is, when I hear FedEx and UPS talk about blockchain being used as, let's call it a standard or a utility, where all the players, be it the person sending the package, the one receiving, and everybody involved in it, including regulatory authorities and different participants it passes through, can they get on the same sort of platform and utility, and can we realize the benefits of that in cross-border trade, as you mentioned, and with the volumes that we see, which are increasingly every year. We smash records of that every year. Can we get to that level of co-opetition, firms working with each other while still competing for margins and profit along the way, but using blockchain as a layer for that shared trust?
Right. So for to answer that, right, we got to go back and talk about no blockchain at all for a minute, right?
Mhm.
So if I wanted to share information with my partner, who I may hire to move a certain piece of information, certain piece of freight, as an example, I have to give them the information. I have to write it in a piece of paper or give them, paper bill of lading or whatever it is, but I have to give that information as the originator of the shipment. So the information is needed, right? Blockchain or no blockchain. The area where it becomes important with blockchain is we're going to enable it and make it easier for them to access that information. You have access to yours, I have access to mine. We can share, we can update. That's what this brings it, right? Now, there are two benefits to that. So you add that, you now have shared that information. If I share that information, does it enable you to do something differently, right? Does it improve the service? Okay, and that's where both UPS and FedEx and other companies, right? They all have to differentiate on the type of service and on the type of value they're going to provide to the customer. The information that gets compiled and gets delivered to you, and how we present that to you, right? How we correlate different, if you move it through different carriers and stuff like that, how we bring them all together, how we display it to you, what value you get out of it. That's the place where we have to sort of compete. And if the technology can reduce, let's say the time in transit or whatever it is, that's the other area that we can play, right? So those are all areas where we think is very fair game for us to differentiate in terms of providing value to customers, providing service to customers. The data part of it, between sharing of data between different organizations, a level of sharing is always going to be there. And we do that today without blockchain anyway. So we don't think that that's going to materially make a difference in the cooperation land, right? So that's at least the thinking around beta and why we are all together and what we can do, right? It's not, we all need pieces of data. Let's create a framework, let's put a standard together, let's find opportunities where we can make it easier to deal with, to share that information. And yeah, I think Andrea said this in earlier, that we all have EDI, some form of EDI that moves data back and forth. So blockchain makes it a different flavor of sharing that information. That's how we view it.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing your journey, Mahesh. And I look forward to the day when UPS launches a blockchain product. I'll be the first one to talk about it. These are exciting times. And you mentioned that we have gone through a lot of journey here. I will put that in perspective. I think we've made a lot of progress in the last 40 years, and particularly enterprise blockchain. And then we are getting very close to where we could actually leapfrog. And that to me is the biggest hope and also the biggest target, without which disruption cannot really sustain. So without which, to me, there's not much value in doing these activities. Right? So thanks for that. Now let's get to the question I asked very briefly, since we have a few audience questions as well. So I'll go back to Michael, since we started there. So Michael, what was one thing that really excited you the most in this journey, and what would you tell somebody differently to do differently?
So I think the thing that I was most excited about of the journey is that, we got to learn something completely new that no one in our enterprise was working on or knew about, and we were bringing that to the organization. And I think, also we have expanded on that and brought the education and the collaboration across the enterprise on blockchain to the company. And so that's really, it's great for the company because we've seen people grow in their knowledge and their experience, and proof of concepts are starting throughout the organization. That wouldn't have been possible had our team not initially taking it on. As far as what would I do differently, I'd probably spend more time on the product management side. And our roadmap started as an IT POC, and with the technology and standing it up. But having that business owner and that product person that had really a stake in the game and was there working with us from the beginning would definitely have helped us out in getting through the process. IT sort of took on the whole effort, including talking with the farmers along with our partner, and all of the business side of it. And had we had those people aligned more closely day one, it would have helped move the process a lot quicker, I believe.
Right. Thanks for that. While we're going through this question, panelists, if you look at the Q&A, there are 3 questions there. If you want to take a stab at them on text, you can do that as well. So let's get to Andre. Same question to you. What excited you the most throughout the journey, and what would you tell somebody to do differently?
Yeah, I think what excited me is really, what we do well in Kona is bringing different organizations to work together to agree on the process, agree on the standard. That's what we did with our 12 largest bottlers, but then extending this to larger networks and having in the room some parties where you definitely see it's in a semi-trusted environment, right? Different organizations, so bringing them together, brainstorming together, and agreeing on the standard that we're going to use for to improve the business process, right? So and it was very, very exciting because in the initial sessions, we heard some comments that kind of pointed to the semi-trusted environment, but then as you implement the technology, you see this goes away and people start taking this data, the high quality data with now better and relying on that, right? And then what I would do differently is, I think in my mind, the private permission blockchain and what we've used kind of definitely showed some of the benefits that can be used to improve the business transactions, remove friction. But this is not where I see the revolutionary products will come from, right? So we're learning, we're proving out, but then we need to take this forward in the next level. And the next level where I see, and we haven't talked here, is really how do I now take all these transactions that are verified and validated by the participants and convert them into tokenization world, and how do I make my financial impact much bigger, right? Because the instruments that we use for today, or the ways we send money today, they're not changing with the blockchain technology, at least in our use case. But if you can start working with other organizations and more looking into DeFi, I know this year is a buzzword, but how can I extend my transactions to fully leverage this technology, use tokenization, and maybe move more into the permissionless world where I don't have to now have a burden of managing the infrastructure. And there was a question on the blockchain interoperability. I think it's a artificially created problem by creating the permission network. And this is what all of us started with, right? Because the permissionless were not there at that time. So I think watch out for these signs and try experiment in these areas and see where you can get a leapfrog in your industry.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing. I'm glad you brought up tokenization and DeFi. That's going to be another event. We could talk another few hours on that. But thanks for sharing your insight. Let's go to Brenda. Brenda, same question for you. What excited you the most through the journey, and what you might do differently or tell somebody to do differently in 2021?
Thank you, Roop. I agree with everything that's been talked about around building confidence around data exchange and breaking down some of those walls about that keep us from sharing data. But what I really get excited about is the employee engagement that we can impact here, what I call time better spent. We have literally thousands of people in our systems, especially in supply chain, who spend time on phones answering simple questions like the one I brought up of where's my stuff. Being able to allow those people to address other aspects of their work, to be able to use a technology that answers questions quickly so they feel more confident, but just impacting the employee experience around answering questions, putting these technologies to work so that people can do more interesting work, I think is a part that we often overlook. And what I see as I have the conversations and spend time directly in these environments that I think we should talk more about. The thing I would do differently, and Mahesh touched on this, is evaluate the product category. You can spending a lot of time in low value has slowed down or lost some of the enthusiasm around these types of shared databases and traceability. I think looking at things like the asset cost, average costs, and the velocity of movement, we can get meaningful projects that can show value quickly rather than sort of grinding through everything that people bring to us.
Right, great point. So focus on high value, low volume that can be proven quickly.
Right.
So Brenda, thanks for sharing your insights. Let's get to Mahesh. Mahesh, same question for you. What excited you the most, and what would you tell someone to do differently in 2021?
So when I looked at blockchain for the first time, I went through a few resources, and I saw a list of 100 or so different use cases or opportunities that that blockchain can enable. This was back in 2017 when I took this over.
Mm-hmm.
So when I saw that for the first time, for me there are a few things, right? Some gears started to go in motion and things started to click in terms of the opportunities that this technology can enable. And for us, I keep saying transformational change or leapfrog, whatever the word we want to use, right? That piece of it for me was very exciting. Is can we do something very differently today than what we've been doing, especially in the supply chain space? Because if you track time on how we've been doing commerce, yeah, things have gotten a little bit faster, but it's the same way things happen. Can you right, you go custom clearance the same way, handing over shipments to a partner the same way? Are there anything that we can do differently from how we interact today with our application systems, integration, all of that? So for me, that was the exciting part of it in terms of, does it enable something different, right? Material change. And then differently would be, I think we need to sort of go after in 2021 or beyond, we need to go after very targeted opportunities, I think. And I think Brenda, you touched on it. For me, that's very important that we start looking at pieces that begin to add value for us. It might not be big transformational things that we kind of think of, but can we immediately go beyond the thought of perfection and pick out certain pieces where we can start to demonstrate value of this technology? Because I think that's where we are kind of stuck in this journey. I feel like we're stuck because we're not getting participation, and we need participation for this technology to work. So then how do you get that rolling?
Yep, great. Thanks for sharing that, Mahesh. So let's wrap up with a few audience questions here. I'll take my shot at some of them, and you guys are welcome to jump in as well. So the one I see about patents, yes, there are plenty of patents. If you do a patent search, you'll find patents from UPS, in fact. I don't know about Kona, but Coca-Cola may have some as well. And as Brenda mentioned, they're working on it. Depending on which asset are you talking about and which process are you really talking about, there are plenty of patents already. We're kind of late in the patent game, if you ask me. Patents have been being out there for the last 8 years or so, if I can remember right. Dr. Benny, your question on standards, grammar, API. Well, it depends on which space. If you're talking about, logistics and supply chain type area, there are quite a few. Although I don't think, and Mahesh, you can keep me honest on that. I know BETA has done some work on it. I don't know how far those standards are adopted, but I know that they have put out standards. Is that true?
It's a work in progress. So there are, I think, 4 or 5 that have been published, with more in the pipeline. So that's where we are.
Right. And the standards question becomes even more nuanced, because then you have to see, well, standards for what? If you talk about, let's take a different asset. Let's take digital advertising using blockchain, or tracking digital ads using blockchain. That's a whole different space, and different standards needed versus moving freight through, cross-border trade. So it depends on what you're looking at. Any other thoughts on standards and patents? Okay, moving on. There's a question here about interoperability, and I hear this question quite a bit, and I'll echo Andre's sentiment. It is a manufactured or a self-created problem. How big of a problem it is, I don't think it's that big. It's almost like, the folks who I've heard ask this question, it's interesting, Bob. What I find is that these folks have actually not really gone on climbing on the Everest, and they're wondering, when I climb on the Everest and when I get to the summit of the Everest, what brand of beer am I going to drink? It's that kind of a question in my mind. You haven't really figured out how to get to the base camp or get to the mountain of the summit of the mountain. Don't worry about the beer you're going to drink over there. That's how I see it. In my mind, it is not a big problem. It is a issue thrown out by skeptics who don't actually want to do the hard part of the journey, which is to figure out the use cases and base technology to climb the mountain. That's my sense. Any other thoughts on that?
Yes,
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would chime in there just very quickly too. I agree. As long as there is a standard for your data extraction, your system can stand on its own. We're not asking you to change your systems. Just meet a standard data set in a standard formatted delivery, and deliver it in the timing that we ask for, and you can extract it in whatever process you want to.
Right. Andre?
That's exactly what I wanted to say. And there were examples of technical implementation of, for example, Hyperledger Fabric cross integration. And again, it's just no more than some cloud development that will help you to build this trusted service that will help you bring data from one side to another. But again, do we need to do that? Or do we need to think a little bit differently how you run the applications?
Right.
So one real quick thing, when I mentioned interoperability, it was not technology interoperability. So I just want to be clear about that part of it, because if you recall, I did mention that there will be many different ecosystems that's going to get created because, UPS joins one FedEx. So it's interoperability between ecosystems of different or communities of different ecosystems, right? So how do you connect them together? That's the interoperability challenge.
Right. Fair enough. So as we're running out of time, let's just get to this last question here. How do you document processes, track actuals, budgeted, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah, so I feel that's a standard question that has been answered in the business process automation and business process world. I come from that world, so I'm very familiar with how that's been done. If you want to go research, look up BPMN, business process modeling language, or modeling grammar and language, and there are plenty of automated platforms that allow you to model processes and document them already. So I think that is kind of answered in the old way of doing things. So Dr. Ben, a fair point. In EDI, standards helped in the beginning for adoption and getting everybody on the same standard, and then constrained innovation. So that's a fair point. I think we are somewhat in the middle of that journey. And to me, frankly, the standards war is going to keep going on, as we've seen in other technology. If you talk about, Wi-Fi or even your phone, this is a constant battle in technology that will keep going on. It's not going to end with blockchain. What we might find is default or de facto standards in terms of platforms that get adopted for particular use case. So what I'm saying is, let's say, just for argument's sake, Ethereum becomes a preferred platform for X use case, and Stellar becomes another one, and Hyperledger Fabric is for another use case, and Hyperledger ND ends up for another use case. I think that's what's going to happen, rather than one standard for all of them. So with that, we are out of time. I do want to remind you, since some folks joined later, that Tag Blockchain Society is launching 4 new programs. Demo Day on October 20th, mentorship program, Tag Blockchain Stars, and a legal working group with all these leaders listed. If you're interested, reach out to them and get engaged. Our next event is October 21st, which is one of our regularly scheduled events, just the day after the demo day. So please tune in for that and sign up. And with that, I do want to thank our board who have supported us along the journey, and some of them are here today. So thank you for your support and guidance. And thank you all for joining. And this has been an interesting conversation. A recording of it would be sent to the folks who registered. And if you have any thoughts or questions on next events and topics, feel free to reach out to Jagrati Solanki, who is our chair for events, and myself, Roop Singh. Thank you for being there, and have a good day.
Thank you.